is the perception of the actual possible.
Well, what do you mean by perception? That's the question.
That is the question.
What is perception? To perceive.
Let us explore the question.
What is perception? To perceive.
All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream.
Please examine for yourself with your own being.
There's just no other way. Honey, I'm sorry.
You gotta do the work yourself.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, Mystery Go and the Feral Monk with another recorded podcast. So it's not really live, but we're recording it live.
Anyway, yeah, we're working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah, we are. We're getting there. Got some production value increase with this one. So I hope you guys are enjoying that. If I'll look and sound a little bit better this time. But,
yeah.
Anyway, this is our fourth episode, and we're coming in after exploring time as a subject and all of the facets involved with time. We got some notes here. Basically, asking yourself what time is becomes a meditation in itself, and it can be applied to any other kind of search for knowledge. But when we're talking about time and space, you know, we're talking about human life and the human experience, and the problems within. Understanding that life seems to create less probable positive outcomes in our interactions, and so that stress and suffering and anxiety, you know, comes, and these are things that, you know, we talked about that are caused by time, and basically how that is affected by our perception of it. So switching it now from time into perception seems like a natural order of things. And
it does.
And so, you know, taking it down to like a basic level with perception, you know, you've got the five senses. But I also wanted to mention, you know, kind of like as an underlining note for time is, you know, that we can make time, you know, our friend or our enemy, you know, just as a simplistic way of looking at it. And so we're trying to figure out how to tackle that enemy. And so we think that you can do that by perception. So that's what we're exploring today. And perception can be basically started out, you know, just basically looking at the five senses, you know, your sight and sound and taste and touch and your smell. And then you can also look at perception through a different lens. And Mr. Monk, why don't you talk about some of that and get us started off here?
Okay. For me, like reflecting on like our first couple of spontaneous conversations about these topics, for me, I noticed the same thing, that, you know, we started off with time at the suggestion of Mr. Cassiano as a starting point, which was very nice that it came from outside the topic that we were going to discuss. And it's, to my sense, it's sort of like developed into the problem with time, therefore the problem with life, and therefore perception, which is sort of the mechanism through which we experience life with all of its problems and its pain and suffering and stresses and anxieties. That it's that sort of makes it one of the key components that needs to be addressed. If we're going to do anything serious about changing our experience of our lives, then we would have to look deeply into what perception is. And so the problem of life as I see it, which recaps a little bit of the other episodes as well, is that we pretty much we have consciousness. Like that's the basis of our experience, and this consciousness is able to perceive. Right. And whether it's a byproduct of the mind or it's something interdimensional or spiritual or whatever else, we can leave all that stuff to the side for a second and just sort of look at it in its sort of raw or naked form. That we have this consciousness through perception is experiencing a world. It's experiencing space, time, which is completely interwoven together. It's experiencing its life. And we came to this conclusion last time that what we're really describing is change, in essence. That life in essence is change, time in essence is change. And the stresses and anxieties in our lives tend to revolve around change. And so our perception of change colors a lot of how we then experience those changes. Those changes are inevitable, so there's a certain amount of urgency in confronting oneself with that fact. That these kinds of changes are taking place in all aspects of our life, continuously over the course of our life, developing, and they don't just develop in a vacuum. And so perception, one type of perception that would be helpful to get into in addressing these problems of being a conscious being in space-time, subject to continuous change and uncertainty about those changes. To take that problem on with a little bit of like patience and calm and try to look at it clearly, we can see how perception, we touched on the Buddhist development of perception. So you have some type of a stimulus that occurs, and that stimulus evokes sensations, and those sensations are experienced as feelings, or as pain, as joy, as sadness, as exhaustion, as many different things. And so you have this stimulus, and then you have like a sensation, and you have the perception of that sensation. At that point, your perception is still very clean. But at the point that the perception then is taken by the mind and added to its store of cataloged changes and responses, it begins then to try to respond, which becomes a reaction, because it's not a conscious response. It's a practiced or a learned or a conditioned response to that stimulus and the perception of it. It can start a feedback loop, and then perception starts to feedback on itself. So the perception of pain causes maybe the stress of sadness about that pain, or anger about that pain, or whatever it is. And then that anger itself is a new stimulus that causes the next sensation that becomes perceived, that then gets taken into that storehouse. And so the mind can get onto a hamster wheel of feedback loop on its perception. And
ripple effect.
Yeah. And unfortunately, tied into that whole process is your culture, your religion, your the way you were brought up, the types of experiences that you've accumulated, the types of responses to those changes in life that you've done, accumulated, your brain, is going to automatically go to, okay, what was working with the highest percentage? If you get approached by a challenge or a problem of life, was it something that you practiced where you would hide away in a poor me type of situation, which is also going to be a sensation that's going to stimulate another perception and another reaction. And so we can see how cycles of depressions and all of these kinds of things can come off of this mechanism of perception that through our basic unawareness of it is sort of like it was accumulating and responding and acting, and it's collected this huge momentum. And added into that momentum are also even like the political ideologies of the your society. All of those things feed into that, and so that perception itself over time has nothing to do anymore with what is as it is.
Right.
It has everything to do with a preset for the mind through which to experience and view its life.
Kind of like a default setting,
It's kind of like a default setting that's just going and going and going, and the brain does it really well, calculating all these things, anticipation, using the store of memory to
human brain
to try to come to some type of projection or anticipation of what could be. Like we were talking about, though, the problem is then getting caught up in the stress that is involved in all of those things.
Right.
The stress of the challenge itself, and the incessant feedback loop of your culture and religion and your own preferences, your own accumulated experiences of pleasure and pain, your own accumulated responses and reactions. And so then it comes to sort of a point where you have to ask yourself, what do I really know about perception then, and about my own perceptions? How many unchecked, unconscious, or subconscious viewpoints are just a product of this endless autopilot? And how much of those perceptions are actually truly me perceiving something fresh, trying it's almost like there's a conflict between conditioned perception and a deep part of knowing within ourselves that is aware of an unconditioned perception.
Right.
And so whenever we think about like the approaching the problems of our life, I'll turn it right back over to you. What I find interesting is then how do we come to an understanding of the process of perception that frees us from the more mindless autopilot aspects of it and allows us some type of fresh, clean perception of the world as it is.
Right. Misperceptions.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say that I think that it's important to emphasize that without consciousness, we wouldn't have the perception, right?
Yeah.
That they're tied in together. And so often what we
they're probably as inseparable as perception and consciousness are probably as inseparable as space and time. Sorry, I'm just this is like a quick thought,
No, that's perfect. Yeah. And you can even take it back to what we talked about with Mr. Cassiano with the how he liked to dichotomize into the categories of the mind, body, and soul. And so with the the perception and the consciousness being kind of interwoven together, you have to look at that as like as a soul level. And then of course with the what the mind likes to do is it likes to perceive everything. And like just like the monk was saying, it's all based on, you know, our past experiences and our programming from society. And it's so difficult not to be reactionary with all these things that are can be misperceived. And I think that, you know, like as an artist, you know, sometimes likes to view things as like, you know, you can, in order to really see something, you have to kind of look away from it. So I think that that's necessary, like in our own mind, like for us to really get it, we've got to drop like our preconceived notions of perception and like get away from that kind of ego state of mind into the more awareness and consciousness aspect of it.
I think it's a good point. Like basically, you know, we need freedom to be there at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not something that you can say, okay, I'm going to do these things and I will become free by the end of it, because there's this freedom is required in order to be able to see the phenomenon at play while it's at play. Because if it's not an awareness that occurs while the things are happening, then it's an intellectual exercise. That's why I don't necessarily think that a meditation practice is something that you do. I mean, it is something that you take time to sit down and explore and dive into, but I don't think that that's the form that it should be mostly taking. It should be mostly taking as much of like your moment to moment day as possible. You know, there's obviously you're going to be swept away in that momentum of mental story. I don't think that I don't believe in the idea that meditation causes that to stop. But I do experience that it has less power whenever it's seen for what it is. Like it has less control or power over you, you know? So that freedom has to be there at the beginning to even be able to see the theater at play, you know?
It does. Absolutely. So
and it's
on a simplistic level, you know, we mentioned time as a friend and an enemy. Perception is the same thing.
Yeah.
To be looked at as the same kind of simplistic terms, like based on the way that we perceive, we can be our own worst enemy.
Yeah. And it's probably something that we don't consider so often. Like you know, in the throes of daily stress, you might not, maybe in your entire life, you maybe never considered the possibility that the way you're perceiving the world is a huge contributor to your suffering, and it's an unnecessary one, you know? And yeah, I think that's definitely an important point for us all to be aware of, you know,
that's where
how conditioned perception can cause the types of ideas and concepts and preferences and interests that you have that can be negative and stressful and unfruitful or not useful. And we were talking about this before we started recording. It comes down then to like sort of this idea, it's a skill, you know, being able to navigate the challenges and problems of space-time, being conscious, and experiencing the constant change of the world and that the ensuing uncertainties of that, and the truth of your eventual death, you know, in all of that mess, you know, a super important thing actually that people I hope will come to like recognize it at their own pace and their own time in their own lives. You know, how important it is to gain a perspective on those things, just in the very basic way of how much your life fucks with you, you know.
Yeah, and you spoke a little bit of equanimity before, and that's really what it's about, isn't it? You know, cultivating equanimity and being able to see things from all different perspectives and sides, so you have compassion and can understand, you know, other people's perspectives without getting into fights and, you know.
Yeah. And the problem at that moment then is just how, right?
Yeah.
Like once you know, a consciousness gets to like a self-reflective point, and it's resting in its like primary point of seeing, and it's gained this little bit of detachment from the traffic and the noise of the conditioned perceptions playing themselves out as thought in the mind. You know, it then has like that opportunity to or the space to allow like a different way of I'm stuck with like some German words in my mind, like Umgang, Umgang, you know, like it's not how you deal with life. It's not how you, I wouldn't know how to explain it, but
I feel
like almost like how you walk, like how you walk the life, you know, like it's not, walk's not the proper translation, but it's kind of like that.
how you proceed through
How you walk the talk, or how you know, and it's important for that, you know, because otherwise the walking and the talking is just based off of that troublesome mind chatter that, you know, like what was it the other day we were talking about, like a really great like simple analogy is like, you know, this momentum that's in the mind. You know, you're out at a blind date at a restaurant, and you're sitting down, you're enjoying your time with your girl, or with the guy who's there with you, and then you notice another girl or a guy sitting across the restaurant, and I think Muji told this story, and you notice them, and they smile, and your mind is like, oh, they're smiling at you, oh, they like you should go over and say hello. And so it starts talking to you, even though you're there actually supposed to be present with somebody else at this particular moment. But, you know, it's always seeking, you know, this next best thing all the time. And so, you know, it's talking on, and it's got you talked up. And now you go over to the table and then slowly approach and say hello. And she looks up at you like, yeah, who are you? Why did you come over here? And then that same momentum of mental garbage then said, you shouldn't have done that. You know, that thing is completely unreliable for your life and how to deal with things. It is. And I know, like, we put a lot of stock into the mind because it's built these great buildings, and our technologies and like all of these things have been produced by it, and, you know, but it's very clumsy in this other part of life. How you deal with the actual experience of life, it's very clumsy for that. It's super clumsy for that. You know, what were we talking about? It's like the carpenter who goes to work, and he's got like one hammer or an old rusty saw and like some bent nails. And he's got to go work in, like, you know, the Raj of Sins, you know, huge palace, you know, to repair something. It's like, dude, that ain't going to turn out well. Like, that's unskillful. You know, and
being a waste of time.
And meditation then is basically the acquiring of that skill to be able to do it, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
It's getting a new saw and straight nails and you know, maybe power saw, maybe power drill. You know, it's hurt. You know,
yeah. And why not equip yourself with the best tools available? But we don't do that, do we?
No, a lot of people even end up in like yoga classes and stuff, and they're not there for that. They're not there for that real like inner transformation and awakening to like, you know, the processes of your own consciousness and how you stumble around and cause yourself a lot of suffering because of your unconsciousness about it. You know, they're going in there to get a nice bikini, or it's kind of a cool thing to do, or it's you know, the yoga classes don't necessarily have meditation, and they don't explain how the asanas themselves are actually meditative things as well. And it's for the same point. Whenever you sit for a long period of time, sooner or later it hurts between your shoulder blades. Sooner or later your legs and your feet fall asleep. If you're in a difficult yoga pose, it's stretching really hard somewhere, or it's difficult in another way to keep your breath even, or you're creating challenges so that you can awaken that inner theater of conditioned perception, so that you maybe have the possibility of seeing the game that is afoot.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. You know,
You're trying to create the conditions to reveal the game, you know?
exactly. And you know, it's just this, like you're mentioning, this conflict between the pure perception and the conditioned perception that we have, that we carry around with us. I know one thing that's helped me recently is just kind of cutting out a lot of media, social media and news. Like, you know, just cutting out that right there, I'm able to control a lot of kind of what I perceive, instead of having it like fed into my brain, and then it has to filter things out, whether that's reality or not. And you know, you can get to a point where you can just predict what they're going to say in the news anyway, so you really don't even need to listen to it that much. Maybe once a week or something, but not 24/7. And it's easy to get caught up in that, and it just that is so hard to not attach yourself to that programming and conditioning.
Yeah.
Which shapes your perception on everything in the world, because you see all this shit going on, and you're like, oh my god, you know, I don't want to go out. People are getting shot up every day, like, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And
But
people are.
that's why like this conversation is an important conversation for everyone to have with themselves. Is like, those things are caused by being completely immersed and hypnotized by that mental feedback catalog of responses to all of these different things that are going on, and if they're heavily informed by ideas of being special or being absolutely right or being, you know, then it also can awaken or can develop into certain types of like aggression or violence against things that push back against that idea. And it's an unconscious process because of that conditioned perceptional feedback loop that's just running and running and running and running, you know,
Just like time.
running and passing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, you know, there's little things that I think you can do. It may be different for everyone. Maybe you don't need to stop watching the news. Maybe you don't get all anxiety ridden like I do about it. But if you do, you gotta stop watching that shit.
Well, or you have to get to a point where, like, you know, you're tuning in once a week or whatever, like you were saying before, and you're tuning in with the idea of this is my meditation now. So if it's my meditation, then I've consciously decided to take in the narrative that's being fed to me from the television, but I'm not allowing that narrative into the mind store, because I'm not going to look at it through the lens of that conditioned perception. I'm going to sit here, I'm going to see the information that comes, I'm going to watch the theater that is stimulated by that information inside myself, and know how those momentums in myself have developed into anger and aggression and different things throughout my life, realize that all of those people are in that same type of process and situation. So there's naturally no type of judgment or anything about it. And then you can filter through all of the side chatter around it, where the media is trying to tell you how you're supposed to think and feel about it, and you can just see what was the event, you know. And you can see, and like you said, it becomes predictable. It becomes predictable because you're aware
You can
of the whole game.
to it, you know.
Yeah.
You're not investing emotionally in it. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like it was horrible about what happened to those people down in Atlanta.
Yep.
It's horrific, the level of violence in America. But what is, you know, really, I think, misfortunate is the way our media turns that into something that's political.
Yeah.
It really screws up, I think, accountabilities, and it's basically just displacement of blame on a grand scale, and it's creating, I don't know, it's creating a lot of unrest in our society, and I'm just starting to kind of see that how much of a player the media can be in that. Even they may not even try and intentionally.
No, they might also be the product of it themselves, who are also living it out, completely unaware of their conditioned perceptions of which, you know, basically become their worldviews. You know, it's completely possible. I mean, people who were aware of it and intentionally used it as propaganda. Propaganda has been used for a long time.
Oh yeah.
You know, humans are not stupid in some ways, and stupid in other ways. But it's been used for a very, very, very long time because it's effective. And it's not that it's effective on everyone. It's effective on people who are mostly intensely caught up in that conditioned perception, and they're identified with it. They're sure that that's them. They're sure that that is the truth of who they are, and that's how they are, and that's how the world is. And
they feel
just by analyzing it as we did now in this moment, you know that that's not true. Right. It's a completely colored perception of reality on a feedback loop, conditioned especially by media and especially by political narrative and
culture.
Yeah.
Society.
And we don't have it in our culture. There have been cultures that existed, especially in India, that took that on. But in our culture, we don't really have like an established habit of seeing the value of seeing through stuff like that. Like, we don't have a culture that encourages that to a certain degree. Even the spiritual cultures and stuff that we have, they're still also mostly money-making enterprises, you know. And I understand there is a certain amount, like in today's world and stuff, there is something to be said for teaching being a service, and then there be some type of monetary exchange for that service. There's something to be said about that. But what I see practically in the world is a lot of people with very little experience, very little insight into what they're doing. They're parroting sentences that they've read from a book, or that they've heard from another teacher. Or, you know, there's these grandiose, very broad claims of everything is one, and, you know, these types of things where it's like, well, you know, it's true what you said, but the place inside of you that said it isn't true, you know. And the way in which it's intending to use it as like a show of intelligence, or as like some type of upper hand on someone else, also reveals its falseness, you know.
Yeah, because that too is a conditioned perspective, right?
It's a completely different thing to
Different
sit
vision.
down, put all of your preconditions aside, or at least be able to detach yourself and allow them to come up without engaging in them.
Right.
You know, that much at least is needed in order to gain a clear perspective on what exactly is happening there.
Yeah.
And you have to go in and do it yourself. Like you have to actually, it's in some ways in the beginning, it's a discipline, you know, it's a discipline where you say, you know, come what may from the mind and the body, I'm going to sit here and vigilantly remain aware of that theater, not trying to figure out anything out about it, nothing else. I'm going to spend time as pure awareness of the shit happening inside of me.
That's it. That's what the meditation can do for you. But you want to be able to carry, like you said, meditation isn't just sitting, you know, in lotus position with your palms out, you know, being quiet with your eyes closed. And, you know, meditation can be carried over.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like, you know, challenges that come up on, I mean, say maybe like intellectually, you know, we're talking about this and it awakens like an interest and to see what that's all about. All of these things are still very intellectual, you know. I'm going to go try that out. I'm going to go see that technique or go to that teacher or do this thing or whatever. But if the techniques and the visualizations and the things that you're doing aren't taking you to the source from which you're seeing, like the point from which you're looking from, like if it's not taking you to that, it's only taking you into a new constellation of preconditioned perception. So it's not going, it's what you're hoping for if you're in a religious practice or a spiritual practice that's maybe not as direct as what we're talking about, or whatever. What you want to hope for is that somehow that recognition of that conditioned theater becomes recognizable for you. Like that's what you're hoping for, is that you can meet that moment in whatever like tempo of ripening or in whatever form of pursuit. Hopefully you can that it will happen out of that, simply from like the fact that you considered this once, you know, that it was a consideration intellectually at the beginning, you know, can turn into much more than that. Like it can
Seeds, plant
yeah
seeds.
Yeah.
And you know, hopefully they'll grow into something pretty and help out with your everyday existences.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, especially with the stress and the anxiety and
we like to refer back as an examples to the person cutting us off in traffic, and you know, maybe changing, shifting that for perception and perspective gives you a moment of compassion towards that person, and like, oh shit, they must be having a bad day, or God knows what they went through before they left the house this morning, or you know, who knows why they're in such a rush to get where they're going. And instead of, you know, creating the whole ripple effect of cause and reaction, you know, just step back and like just let things kind of just exist. One more little thing I think that I'll relate on that same kind of note of the ripple effect. I'm not sure if it's Taoist or it's probably Eastern, but this image and concept of being like water, and not only that, but being like flowing water. You know, like if a rock gets dropped into a lake, you know, there's a big kerplunk, and then there's just ripples, right? And they just keep on rippling out onto the shore. There's a lot of you know, effect from that. One rock being dropped in still water. But if your water is running like in a stream and you drop that rock in it, it just sinks to the bottom, and there's barely any ripples at all. Water just keeps on flowing right around it, And so I think that's a good lesson, for me to kind of, in my little note on, is to just try to be more malleable and more open and soft, don't be so hard. It's going to be all right. Let the water flow on.
Yeah, I think you touched something actually very deep, like about to be like water, in the sense that it's also exactly that. When you're sitting down and the theater starts, all of the drama, all of the suffering, and all of the stress and all the pain that starts nagging you inside your consciousness, whenever all of that stuff starts, being like water is like allowing that to just keep on going, just like the rock is being slowly worn away by the running water. It's I think in the Eastern tradition that you're talking about, they talk about water being the softest substance, but able to wear away the hardest stone, and in that type of sense, that's exactly what is happening as consciousness is resting in perception, in clean perception, like unconditioned perception, aware of the process of perception and the complicated conditioned perception that keeps coming up. As it doesn't engage in it, it's just being like the water, right? So it's just moving around all of those things without getting touched by it, and or you could say all of those things are like a lot of different stones in the being that are weighing you down, and the being is like the water that's rushing over those conditioned perceptions, slowly wearing them away until they're just tiny little pebbles of sand at the bottom of the riverbank, and the river has grown deep, and the current in the center of the river is swift, and it's on its way back to Mama Ocean, and and the stream of consciousness can exactly develop or experience that particular course through a life. It's an opportunity that is constantly here for all of us, and understanding and contemplating and things like that are sort of like keys that sort of unlock these latent or undiscovered parts of ourselves, that in turn have an incredible effect on our experience of life.
Absolutely. I think that's a good stopping point on this one. Definitely want to thank everyone for listening in today, and also want to segue a little bit into the next one. Believe we've got a special guest. Mr. Jeb Connor is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about mythology. So shift our conversation towards that direction. But,
and it's not a big shift either, because mythology would just be, in the conversation that we've had today, mythology would be one of those wells of information that tends to condition perception.
Exactly.
But mythology was an intentional conditioning. It was an intentional conditioning to help people develop a relationship to their life that would enable them to meet the challenges of that life. And so it wasn't a senseless programming of perception, like in my opinion TikTok is.
Good
it was purposeful.
So definitely check us out next time for that. You don't want to miss out on that. But Mystery
Man,
Ghost,
I just wanted to say thanks again for doing this, man. It's super cool. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the conversations. I enjoy the effect it's having in my life on me, like on my own development and stuff too. It's a blessing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, brother. Anytime, man. It's my pleasure, and it's very special to me. And if anyone else out there enjoys it half as much, I think, as we are, then that's good. Because I'm enjoying it too. I look forward to it immensely, and I look forward to getting better and better at this, and hopefully bringing some really interesting conversations to the table. Mystery Go out.
Let us explore the question.
What is perception? To perceive.
All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. Please examine for yourself with your own being. There's just no other way. Honey, I'm sorry.
You gotta do the work yourself.